get these glitches. I think the file size gets so big, but also what tends to happen is this weird phenomenon. My screens flash and I get glitches in the computer. Like weird shit happens in the morning, but whatever. That's not going to get into any of that. Once you recognize that the nature of existence, again, which is why to metaphysics is so important. This is what you should need to study, before physics, is what Aristotle used to teach. That was part of his curriculum, is because it has direct implications on how to live and how to govern and how to structure society. They're directly related. You take a materialistic, physicalist, capitalist view of the world, everything perishes upon death. It's whoever gets, has the most shit at the end. You build a society based on that. There's going to be a certain level of dysfunction. I'm not advocating socialism. I'm suggesting that at least let's step back and understand what we're doing here, what this world truly is, and based upon that, at the very least, forget about the way society is governed and how it's structured. How should we be behaving based upon this knowledge? We're not taught any of this in school. This is where a lot of the conspiracy theories and shit come in. Because people are like, people know this, and nobody teaches any of this stuff. You can't teach religion in school. Okay. Freedom of religion. Okay. But be a good person. Why? Because I'm sending you to the principal's office? If you're a pain in the ass? There's nothing, love thy neighbor. Like, where is this coming from? Like, I'm a curious person. I'm like, well, why? Why should I be nice to this guy? Well, why shouldn't I just run him over and take his money? Well, because I'll get arrested. But that's not a reason. What's my relationship to this person? I mean, yes, if we're good neighbors, we protect each other. It sort of facilitates a stable, structure within which that I can live. And yes, but it's really very loose mindset. It's grounded in this idea of fundamental separation. It's grounded in this idea of objective realism, that I am separate from the stable, that I am separate from you, that this world is a physical, materialistic world, which we know that there's truth in that perspective, and there's power that's yielded from that perspective. That's where the atom bomb at some level comes from, that perspective of, what if we tear atoms apart? What happens? But it doesn't explain any of this other phenomena that are mental phenomena, that are psychological phenomena, that are spiritual phenomena, right? That are based on this idea of the soul, which everything sort of wraps around. And this idea, when you start to peel back the onion of the mind, what you come to understand is that you cannot fully appreciate, you cannot fully understand and know what the mind is and who you are unless there exists a persistent element of you that can even reflect on these things. It's this is why philosophy and why reason is important. Who's thinking and who's concluding and who's rationalizing all this stuff? And how is it that this person has, an element that exists in the conscious, and then there's this unconscious world where time and space start to bleed into each other? In the Vedic literature, what they talk about, and this gets into the more metaphysics part, but they talk about not the real world and the dream world. They talk about the gross and then the more subtle, the dream world, and then sort of other states of consciousness that are higher than that. It's subtle. And they talk about that in the Vedic literature and the yogic literature, and that's part of what I was taught. And it's a much more accurate metaphysical description because there are these layers, and really what they end up being is, vibrational frequencies that you end up tapping into that facilitate the understanding that you are not the body. And it goes from the gross, where, the gross is the stuff you can touch, the five senses, right, into the more subtle realms, the dream realms, and some of the higher states of meditation. And these worlds, the subtle nature of them is a good word to describe them, because they become less, not potent, but they become less physical. They become, the substance starts to deteriorate. And this is part of what the yogic practices are based upon, is this sort of thinning of the ego. Yes, you want to elicit, sort of, everybody wants that spiritual awakening and that great experience, yes, but the yogic practices are much more practical than that. And the Buddhists, the 8 pillars of Buddhism is really based upon, Patanjali's, the 8 limbs. It's all, and Jesus' teaching, it's all really the same thing. It's don't believe me that, this idea of separation is illusion. Don't believe me, but practice the art of thinning the ego, and that will reveal itself to you in your mind and in the world around you. And that's what the practice is. The practice is just the thinning of the ego. Even people that are enlightened, in fact, they still should practice meditation. There's a story about a yogi, and it's Ramakrishna in Todapuri, who is the great Advaita Vedanta yogi, non-dual Brahman. And Ramakrishna asked him one day, he says, you fully realize you're one with, the consciousness itself, one with the divine. Why are you practicing meditation? You're already perfect. He's like, no, even when you have a pot, even though it's a clean pot, you still want to clean it. You want to shine it every day. And you get this idea of it's what you have in the physical form is an instrument. And, as an instrument, you want to tune it. This idea of music and Pythagoras is a really very powerful idea. You really, not too many people recognize how much he brought to the table, and why, of course, like Socrates and like Jesus, he was killed for his ideas. This idea that music, harmony of the spheres, this relationship between math and music and proportion and octaves. We are vibration and energy, and sort of that octave metaphor of being able to sort of, and of existing on several dimensions at the same time, just as music has different vibrational frequencies that are buried into it. And when you add them all together, there's a beautiful harmony. It's the same idea with the physical form and the dream state and the waking state and other higher states of consciousness. But ultimately, everybody knows that they exist in the waking state, and everybody knows that they exist in the dream state. But there's this discounting of the dream state, this discounting of myth, archetypes, this discounting of symbol and of meaning. This is a lot of what Jung's work was about. And this discounting and denial of its reality is like a poison. It's like we've denied a certain aspect of ourself. This religion comes out, all religions come out of this, come out of direct realization by individuals that have fully appreciated and understood the dimensional complexities of being a human being, of having a soul. And they have tried through various languages and symbols to express that to us. And we have, as a society, and this is again where a lot of the conspiratory stuff comes in, we have carved that up, we have packaged it, we have put it over here in the domain of religion or the domain of psychology. Regardless, it's not science. This is where all the crazy people are. Everybody else, hey, come over here, and you got to make some money, and you got to buy some cars and buy nice houses and keep up with the Joneses. This stuff you can talk about late at night after a couple of beers. It's fundamental. If you're not paying attention, you're missing the point. So the idea that this physical realm is the most important and critical of realms that your soul exists in, and we've already recognized that there's at least 2, right? Even though there's many more than that, but there's at least 2 that everybody has access to every day in a 24-hour cycle. Once you recognize that, all sorts of doors open up. So I'm going to close with just a simple technique, and I've actually seen this on TikTok a little bit too. It's like a, you know, there's ways to like hack the matrix, which is a terrible, you know, it's a terrible phrase, but like there are. It's weird. But anyway, so what you can do, and this is a meditation trick, as well as it is a, you know, a psychological understanding trick, right? So you have the waking state, and then you have a dream state, and you have that sort of, what is the principle that's consistent between the two, right? You can get a sense of who you are if you understand those two different states and their polarity and what they, you know, what the scope of being is for you as an individual, right? But if you want to expand that a little bit, there's a particular state of being that you are in when you transition. It's like a flip. There's like a quantum flip that occurs. And I'm using Dr. Jeffrey Kripal's language here about around the flip, which is a flip in understanding. It's a flip of understanding from the physical form into, you know, your being in a body of energy. But there's also kind of a smaller flip that takes place quite specifically as it relates to the waking state, to the dream state. And what they talk about is some like Tesla or some of the old scientists. They used to have like rubber balls in their hand, and they would sit in a chair and then they would fall asleep, and one of the balls would fall down. So as soon as they would fall asleep, they wake up. And I actually have a chair right here to my left, and it's like half uncomfortable, but it's the chair of my old dog, and I won't give it away. In fact, we haven't even washed it since, which is a little scary. But anyway, the poor dog died in a tragic accident. I don't want to get into that here. But anyway, the chair that she used to love, I sleep in that chair sometimes in the morning because I get up early, whatever, and then like 10 or 11, I'll fall asleep in the chair or whatever, and I'll wake up because my head will roll or whatever, and it's like, and what you find if you do that consistently, which is like, you start to become aware of your awareness as it moves between states, right? And again, you have this, and this is a technique that I'll use over and over again, right? Is this idea of triangulation of the truth. Don't believe one data point. Take a bunch of different data points, and what does that tell you? So you have a waking state data point, you have a dream state data point. Okay, if it's just two data points, you can kind of split the two and say they're separate. Okay, but then when you fully appreciate and experience the transition state, you cannot say that they're separate and distinct. They're connected. Question is how, and what is the basis of that connection? And if that connection exists between waking state and the dream state, are there other states that are connected in a similar way? This is where sort of deductive reasoning comes in. And this is part of what I try and explore in a system of metaphysics, what I call metaphysics of awareness, which is a much broader concept of metaphysics in general, and speaks to thought and being as being the sort of ontologically most significant aspect of reality that we manifest in a physical world that's governed by physical principles. But that doesn't mean that this is the only dimensional state. We know that it's not. This isn't conjecture. This isn't the theory. This is, everybody has a dream state. There is a relationship between the dream world and the real world. We know that for millennia. This idea of synchronicity is something that, Jung speaks of directly, which is where this sort of the material world and the spiritual world, the archetypes and the physical, they come together to sort of hit you with something that has meaning. This is sort of this idea of synchronicity. It's a musical term for a reason. And so what I want you to at least leave this discussion with is understand that, yeah, there's a lot of spiritual stuff, and there's a lot of theological stuff, and yes, there's some truth there depending upon who you listen to and what they're talking about. But I want to build from the ground up. As a scientist, what do we know? And these are things that everybody knows. So part of what's missing from a sociological structure and from a from a social standpoint, is this idea, this connection to, the myth, the archetype, the narrative of the spirit, the soul. There's an article that I write in my first book, Theology Reconsidered. There's one of the essays is the death of the soul. It comes out of the Enlightenment. It's like, they burst forth with this idea of science, and in its wake is the soul is dead. As Nietzsche said, God is dead. And he's terrified of what the world looks like with that prospect. And what happens in the early part of the 20th century? The world goes insane. Tens of millions of people die. World War II, Stalin. And then slowly we're starting to, and I think with some intervention, trying not to destroy the world and everybody in it, which is how close we are right now. We could destroy the world 100 times over. Push of a button. Maybe we should rethink some things. Anyway, it's just a diary entry, right? That's all it is. Note to self. If anybody's listening and they got this far, great stuff. Hopefully it was interesting for you. It's always interesting for me. And everybody have a hell of a day. Peace.